And I have to say, this is probably one of the easiest writers' conferences I've done, just because I'm not traveling through the airports. And it's a pleasure to be able to reach such a wide group of interested romance writers. So I'm in my particular talk. I had been at Harlequin for 20 years, and I remain very active in the romance genre. I just this year spoke at the Emerald City RWA conference. I was at the national conference in Denver, Colorado. I just registered for the new RWA conference. It's going to be in New York this year. And so I wanted to touch on some of the wisdoms I'm getting in terms of what seems to be trending right now in the marketplace, and what over the course of my career in working with romance and romance writers I'm seeing is some of the top things that really make a romance stand out, and unfortunately some of the things that are common pitfalls that romance writers can encounter that can otherwise sort of mar what could be a really great romance. So what I'm seeing right now and hearing from different editors that are trending, obviously, are Smalltown contemporaries. Rayanne Sane is a name that should be familiar to many of you. There's a host of women, and I always am reluctant to cite too many names because I don't want to leave anyone off, but certainly names like Deb Mason, Nancy Robards Thompson, Jill Shalvis, Tara Taylor Quinn. All these women are bringing the heart and soul of a small town community to writers, where it's a sense of finding your own family among a group of strangers and really building these special bonds of community in these towns that really have just a wonderful charm to them. Cowboys still remain very popular, and certainly at my time at Harlequin, Diana Palmer was a beloved name. And I know I've heard Caroline Brown is another romance Western writer to watch. Amish is another area that continues to hold appeal. And I saw someone here has a background or interest in Christian fiction, and there's just a strong appeal to the Amish. When I was at Harlequin, I had the pleasure of working with Marta Perry, who's just really built a name for herself in the Amish market in terms of the romances. I see she has something called The Wedding Quilt coming out that deals with sort of the reunion romances, second chance, all in this sort of closed Amish community. Then romcoms has been something really wonderful that's happening now in the marketplace. Some of you may have remembered back in, I would say 2008, 9, and I'm going to date myself, but they were hugely popular. There were some wonderful adaptations and movies on screen. A Harry Met Sally, You've Got Mail, and just that wonderful wit, flirtiness, slow burn. And it's wonderful. Writers like Jasmine Guillory, Helen Hong with the Kiss Quotient, The Wedding Date, are all bringing that genre back, which is sort of the flirty, slow burn. And it's really appealing to a younger readership, which is wonderful. The romance market has been very invested in realizing that we need to find writers of more diversity and own voices. So that's another area that's really wonderful to see that trending now so much. I'm a big romantic suspense fan. I love nothing more than reading about Navy SEALs or a group of medics on larger-than-life rescues, search and rescue mountain operatives, those type of books. They have limited appeal right now. There's certainly a market for them, but they're more, I would say, sort of the Navy SEAL medics, those search and rescue teams, teams of canine units, those type of books. Right now, it seems like there's a limited appetite for historicals. That's a subgenre I personally really, really love. I had the pleasure of working with Courtney Milan and Julia London. Unfortunately, that's a more limited niche market, and it can sometimes be a little harder if you're writing them to find that broad commercial appeal. That said, I mean, I do hear that there is an appetite for some Regencies, some Victorians, some Scottish Highlander type romances like Julia London is writing, certainly some Victorians, some Westerns. So that is something to keep in mind. And as for paranormals, it's interesting. When I first joined Harlequin, the one thing as a very young new editor I learned was that the paranormals were not trending in the marketplace. And during my time at Harlequin, they did come back in the marketplace. Unfortunately, that's a very niche market, so they will come back again. Right now, I'm not sensing as much appetite for them, but as anyone in publishing can always say, all it takes is one person to sort of start the curve, and then there's a strong appetite for it. And I'm assuming everybody knows that when I'm speaking about paranormals, obviously I'm talking about the vampire, the werewolf type books. So those are really the big areas in romance that are seeing some growth and some appetite. The other thing I had mentioned I wanted to talk about was sort of the top ways to sort of make your romance stand out. And one of the big things is sort of being aware within those subgenres. It can't just be enough that it's a Western and your protagonists meet in a wonderful premise, but that's really all that happens. The romance genre is looking for more of some of the beloved tropes within that genre. And some of the popular hooks are the reunion romance, where the protagonists might have known each other when they were in school together. Something happened, they got separated, now she's returned to the small town, and they're going to recognize that they still have feelings for each other, and how are they going to get past the issues that separated them in the past. So those still have tremendous appeal. That second chance at love, where you may have had a first love, but something happened. Maybe you were an early widow or divorced and someone betrayed your trust, and now suddenly you've been given this wonderful second chance at love. I think that's one aspect I think that makes romances so appealing to people, because second chance at love certainly delivers such a hopeful message. I personally love medicals, either set in a hospital or involving medical conditions. And that's a storyline I've always loved, along with royalty. And I think that one speaks for itself, certainly for our UK audience. Billionaires and millionaires. I mean, who doesn't want to be whisked away to this wonderful world? Although in these stories, I'm hearing that a lot of people want to see now the heroine being the one who sort of has it all, and now she has the opportunity to find love with the hero, and not so much the hero saving the heroine as it once was. Large families and that family saga just continue to have tremendous appeal. And certainly when I was at Harlequin, some of the beloved continuities were things like the Fortunes of Texas, the Coltons, and they just followed these various generations of families over extended generations when the series was so popular. And again, it gives that reader that real sense of connection, belonging, that might be, missing from their own life. And again, that message of hope. I mentioned search and rescue. Canine units certainly remain popular. Friends to lovers with that slow burn. And again, that's something we're really seeing nicely in the rom-coms coming out. Enemies to lovers certainly is another trope of the genre. The pretend engagement, where for some particular reason the hero and heroine need to masquerade as an engaged couple, that's remained. Some of the ones that I've seen that are tropes of the genre that might be harder to execute, the love triangle, for example. And that one's sort of interesting because it's very hard, if you have that extra character, for the reader to leave that story and feel sometimes satisfied because they see someone who's lost out in love. And so that can make the ending a little more bittersweet for them, even if you're planning in your next book to do that other sort of jilted bachelor or bachelorette. It can still be hard not to see them win at love and not try to create a stereotype character so that you're going to root for one over the other. And another one I think that might be harder right now to execute is just the alpha male and boss, just to make sure that the situations you set up will appeal to modern sensibilities. I think another big thing that draws the reader in terms of these in terms of romance is that there's a certain promise to the romance reader. They know how your story's going to end, and they want to see how you hit those hallmarks. So they're looking obviously for that escape read. They're looking for something that's uplifting. They want to have a happy ending. I mean, we all know the hero and heroine are going to be together at the end. And the challenge for the reader has been how you're going to overcome these horrible emotional conflicts that usually stem from issues of trust or loss to help the protagonists find their love together. And throughout, you're certainly going to use a level of sensuality that seems appropriate to the story, but not gratuitous, but feels integral to the plotting and, as they say, it's sort of organic. Another area that I think is coming out more, and I'm a big person on that sense of place. I love to be transported. And I think, again, that small town with all the trappings of what we like to think of as sort of the best of small July parades, to stores with window boxes, to the neighbor who leaves you some homemade item because you were sick or something like that. It's just that sense of caring and warmth. And it's so that's another, and that sense of belonging, that community that maybe you haven't felt like you've belonged before, and now in this town they've sort of embraced you with open arms. That might even come with an urban setting, like in an apartment building, for example. If you built up a very close connection among the different residents within the apartment building, you might be able to achieve that same feeling. Characterization is another huge area. And really, for your story to work, and I could probably talk about this one for a long time, you're looking for two things. One, you're looking for a character that your readers are going to empathize with, and they're going to find that character sympathetic. I remember some of the very, very early romances. One of the first ones I edited had a cat fight between two women, and that was just a case where obviously you weren't going to find the heroine very appealing. I think it was, I mean, we're going way back, but I think she even tried to push the other, and you all remember the scene from Dynasty, I think, where the women pushed each other into the swimming pool. I mean, obviously behavior like that, that's a very dated example, but that's an example of how you can undermine your protagonists. You want them nuanced. I mean, no one's expecting your character to be perfect, but even in the flawed character and maybe the very bitter hero who's been burned by love, maybe he's a widower trying to raise a child alone. He lost the wife he loved. Now he's sort of sworn off anybody, or he's on the ranch alone, and the woman he loved left him because she didn't like the small town life, and now he's wary of finding love. And that's fine, I think, as long as you set it out that he'll be sympathetic, but you certainly want to give that character a very rich backstory so that you'll have plenty of information to mine on why they are going to be reluctant to love. Sometimes when you write the perfect family saga, and we've seen in an earlier incarnation of the book that maybe came out in an earlier series, the family, and they were wonderful hero and heroine, and now it's the next generation, it's their children, and you find yourself wondering, well, they came from such perfect families. Why would they be wary of love? They saw a mother and father who loved each other dearly. They had a picture perfect childhood. And sometimes that's where, unfortunately, something like military service or something that's they've seen in life, even as a police detective, if they've walked the streets and seen a lot of teenage runaways, things like that, that might sort of make them more sour and more reluctant to get involved with someone. So you really want to create that rich backstory for your characters, at the same time thinking about, will this backstory keep that person sympathetic to readers? And that really does become an issue of your judgment and how you can render it. The other big thing with characterization is that you want to have a well-realized emotional conflict. And someone, when I first started out, told me that this usually evolves around an issue of trust or loss. And in that, you're going to be making your character face their greatest fear and something that brought them the most emotional heartache, and be willing to believe in this promise of love and the chance to be with this person, that they're willing to put their heart on the line again. So that's the big takeaway for romance readers, is how much of a conflict you're going to set up and how much of a hurdle they're going to have to overcome. What happens if that emotional conflict isn't as strong as it can be is that very often about midway through, they both say, I love you to each other. The reader sort of gotten what they wanted out of the book. You may still have what we call an external conflict going on. That could be, someone stalking the heroine who was behind that, or there's mysterious break-ins in the town, or there was a breakup with someone, but those can all be very external and addressed by conversations, or they just don't require as much emotional growth on the part of your characters. And that's what romances are so much about, is the emotional growth of people willing to believe in this promise of love. Then another big area of what's really going to make your romance stand out is, if you're planning that it's going to be part of a mini series, is really having a strong connection between those books in the mini series. Certainly there are plenty of books set in small towns, as we've said. There are plenty of books set around large families. But usually within those, there's something else that brings the protagonists together and has them working together. One of my favorites has always been, because I really do love romantic suspense and intrigue and thriller type plots, is when you might have the band of brothers working together on, undercover on, let's say, a ranch, and it turns out they're elite Navy SEALs involved in top-level operations, and that ranch is actually a cover point for a military operation they're running and intelligence they're gathering. I remember working on an earlier series with Allison Lee, and her Double C Ranch, as I remember, would typically have that whole undercover operation going on. And so it's that sense, if they're involved in a mission, search and rescue, maybe they're members of a K-9 team within a small community. Again, it's how much connection you can weave between the books to really make it seem like a mini series and not just a group of 3 books loosely linked because they all share the same family last name. Or you've got 2 sisters and 1 brother. That might not be as tightly linked, but maybe if then you have 3 sisters and they all go off and they found some business together and it's wildly successful, and you then have the 3 sister billionaires. That could be a case, for example, of one that might be tightly linked together. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast because I'm just seeing myself in the as I'm talking, so hopefully I haven't lost anybody and everything like that.
Hey, just checking in. It's all going great. We have a lot of questions coming in already, but I'm going to save them to the end. As I mentioned in the comments, if there's anything you guys missed, I'll be sending out a transcript and a replay of this talk at the end of the week, so don't worry about writing anything down, but it's all looking good right now.
Perfect. And we're actually at the last part of the presentation, the top 5 pitfalls.
Cool. I'll see you in a bit.
So for the top 5 pitfalls, I would say one of the things that you can do to help yourself the most is research the market. The wonderful thing about the romance genre is that most of the writers are readers as well. So I'm sure you all recognize what brought you to the genre and who you like and whose writing you would like to emulate, obviously adding your own distinctive twist to it. But I would say certainly it helps to patrol, just because they're online buying operations, as I'm constantly checking, Amazon to see what's sort of popping up, Barnes and Noble, some of the Demix, I think, is in the Australian market, and just some of the different ones to see, what's really appealing. And I would just say when you're researching the market, try to not say, oh, well, this writer was popular in 2010 because that genre and the way they were writing may have fallen out of favor. So you really want to look as close to the current times on what's appealing to readers to get the best sense of where your book could fit on the shelf next to theirs. I would also say create an original opening. Two of the scenes that I think we've all seen, unfortunately, an awful lot. It doesn't mean that they can't be done and can't be done quite successfully, but we've all seen the heroine driving into town. She arrives at the local diner with her secret son. The first person she runs into town is the former boyfriend, who's now the small-town sheriff, and of course, they're at the local diner. It's a wonderful premise. Do not get me wrong. Readers love it. But it's an example of something that you're going to have to bring even more to the table to make your own interpretation of it stand out for a scene that's been done an awful lot. And we've all unfortunately seen the protagonists in cars driving into the town and sort of rehashing why they're coming back to this small town. So I would just be aware of that as you're writing. And the other thing is obviously people brought together by a funeral. Again, a wonderful, certainly mistakes, but just something to be aware of, that when I'm thinking of fresh openings, that's one, for example, that I've seen an awful lot. And again, one of the beauties of the romance genre, and one of the things I've learned over my career in publishing, is never say never to anything, because the minute you say that, you'll see something that's absolutely wonderful. I think the other pitfall to avoid, and this is very easy, is to avoid the info dumping in the opening chapters. And that's where you take them away and the heroine pretty much tells us what's in her synopsis of why she left this town or left this hero or why she hasn't been able to find love. And then we switch at some point to the hero, we learn his story. And the problem is that really takes the reader out of the story. Not only are you providing an awful lot of narrative detail that's just distancing you from the really connecting with the character, but you're also slowing down your pacing and the action that's coming at the reader. So that's just something to be aware of. And I think, as I said, because so many of us write synopses before they write the book, sometimes I think it can happen where you tend to dump in almost like a paragraph or two from your synopsis and, again, take the reader out of your story. Another thing just to be aware of is just to be, you want to keep the fantasy for readers, but also be aware of the sort of the Me Too and own voices, and be very sensitive to that, and creating, again, characters that are going to be sympathetic to readers that you're going to want to be around and you would want to emulate and admire and fall in love with and have as a keeper on your shelf. And finally, a very common problem I've seen over my years in romance is having the secondary characters be too pervasive in your story. And I think that's a real tendency if you and it happens to debut as well as experienced writers, but you're trying to set up the next story. And it's a case of sort of knowing when you've introduced enough details about the secondary character to get the reader interested in seeing, oh, what is their story going to be? I'm curious to see it. And when you've run the risk of making them more interesting than your own hero and heroine. And sometimes they can have more well-developed backstories or a quirkier trait, and you're taking more risks with them. And as I mentioned earlier, with the love triangle, maybe you're trying to set up the jilted bride for the next story. But again, you want to fulfill the promise to the reader that for the romance you're sending them right now, it's going to have well-developed characters who find love, overcoming their own emotional hurdles. There's going to be unique plotting. You're going to have plotting that's complex enough to sustain the length of your romance. And you're also going to obviously deliver on that promise of happily ever after to reader, to, again, give them that sense of hope and escape.